Greetings, carbon-based life forms. Each time you breathe, you increase the carbon dioxide concentration of the air you use by 100 times. Is your breathing polluting? The EPA claims it does. Carbon dioxide endangers public health and welfare because it will cause dangerous global warming. Does your breath endanger human health? We say to the EPA, bureaucratic science. You have no hard evidence that carbon dioxide is causing dangerous global warming. We have hard science that it is not, and is hard evidence that makes knowledge, not speculation. For almost a century, laboratories have tested how radiant energy passes through the atmospheric gases. Those gases that slow the flow of long-wave outgoing radiation are called greenhouse gases. They warm the planet, particularly at night. Try sleeping outside in a desert at night without any blankets. The greatest greenhouse gas is water vapor in both concentration and efficiency. Carbon dioxide is a minor player with limited ability. And even at pre-industrial levels, it was approaching saturation, where the warming effect of an increase in carbon dioxide becomes insignificant. So what happened? Why are we so fearful of carbon dioxide? In 1979, a group of distinguished scientists issued a report called the Charney Report. It claimed that water vapor greatly amplified any increase in warming from carbon dioxide. The report was based on results of 5 models, not evidence. It was speculation, guesswork. We did not know what was happening in the atmosphere. They didn't know what was happening in the atmosphere. So they guessed. Nothing wrong with that. But where is the hard evidence? In 1990, we had a breakthrough, a spectacular breakthrough. Roy Spencer and John Christie had a paper published demonstrating how we can calculate temperature trends from satellite data, which was being gathered since 1978. For their discovery, Spencer and Christie were at first honored and then shunned. Their evidence did not support that greenhouse gases were causing dangerous global warming. The data did not support the guesses in the Charney Report. Their data are published monthly for all to see and to criticize, which is as it should be. Small problems in the imperfect orbits of satellites was discovered and since corrected. Their report this spring in the Journal of Remote Sensing shows that models greatly overestimate warming. If warming is caused by greenhouse gases, it is not dangerous. Based on a fear of greenhouse gases, the United States government has spent over $40 billion on what government reports identify as climate science. But they have been unable to identify hard evidence that carbon dioxide is causing dangerous global warming. On behalf of Fred Singer, the founder of SEPP, I am honored to present to Roy Spencer Roy, congratulations.
Thank you, Ken. Let me shake your hand.
The award is named in honor of Frederick Seitz, a brilliant physicist who was the first chairman of SEPP. And it includes a small, very small, unrestricted grant to Roy or a place of his choice. This is just a small thing we can do to honor the exceptional courage that Roy Spencer has shown in the quest for knowledge and the great contributions he has made to science. Thank you, Roy.
Thank you, Ken. And of course, I'm very honored by this. It's nice to have, when we have some years where we get our buildings shot up by eco-terrorists, it's nice to have other years where something like this happens, right? Sort of the yin and yang of skeptical climate research. I wanted to spend a few minutes, since I've been given a few minutes to talk, about Fred Singer. Most people here have probably heard of James Hansen, who is, I guess I would consider him the modern godfather of global warming alarmism. Started mostly with his Senate testimony for Al Gore back in, I think, 1988. But I think Fred Singer, the founder of SEPP in 1990, he would be here if not for his failing health. I guess I consider him the modern godfather of global warming skepticism. And I wanted to tell two short stories about Fred that I know I don't know Fred personally as well as a lot of people in this room who've worked with him a lot. But I have a couple of stories that maybe you may not be aware of. In a previous research life, my claim to fame was monitoring rainfall from satellites using passive microwave radiometers on satellites to look down and look through the clouds and measure the rainfall. It's sort of the same technology we now use to do that John Christie and I use to do our global temperature monitoring, but these radiometers can be tuned to different frequencies, like your TV tuner can be tuned to different things, different channels. We had different channels in these radiometers. Well, anyway, when I got into that business, I looked at what the history of it was. And the history was that the very first scientist who ever demonstrated with data from an aircraft, that's usually what we do when I worked at NASA, for instance, you demonstrate something with instruments flown on aircraft before you ever design them for space to make sure that they can measure what you want. The very first paper that took data from an aircraft to demonstrate the concept was authored by Fred Singer in 1966. So he was the earliest demonstration, and that was really groundbreaking work. And what's a little ironic, he ended up becoming, like I said, maybe the godfather of modern skepticism. John Theon at NASA headquarters, who used to be my boss's boss's boss up at NASA headquarters, John Theon, was the first one to demonstrate that this worked from satellites rather than from the aircraft data that Fred Singer used. And I think that was in 1976. John Theon went on to become a skeptic after he retired from government service, and it couldn't hurt his career anymore to speak out, and he's been to some of these conferences. And then I came along and demonstrated in 1983 that we could measure not only over the ocean, which is all they thought at the time could be done, measuring precip over the ocean, that it could also be done over land using a different frequency. And my first paper ever in the scientific community that was published in a journal was in the journal Nature, which is the premier science journal in the world, and I even had the cover illustration on the cover. And as Joe Bast reminded me during lunch, and it's been downhill ever since, because Nature will never publish anything by me again, that's for sure. The other story about Fred Singer, I've lost it just for a second. Yes. John Christie and I, in the early 90s, went to visit Bob Watson at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Bob Watson was Al Gore's environmental guy, but he came from NASA. He was a scientist, and he spearheaded the whole ozone hole Freon thing. He was involved in getting the nations of the world to agree to stop producing Freon because we thought it was destroying ozone in the stratosphere. He went to work for Al Gore at the White House, and we went to visit him because we had just published our work on global temperature monitoring with satellites. And he sat us down, sort of to school us because, he had a very high position and we're sort of young scientists. And he said, we banned Freon, and CO2 is next. I will never forget it. This was in maybe 1991. It's just before Bob Watson, I think, became maybe the first director of the UN IPCC. So as I mentioned in my talk, there has been a policy outcome behind all of this from the very beginning. The science has not been driving the policy. The policy has been driving the science. So how does Fred Singer fit into all this? He gave us a warning if we were going to work in climate research to be careful of one man who's very dangerous, Fred Singer. And if Fred was here today, he would probably consider that a badge of honor, and I thank you for the award.